All right, so let's look at the Spurs midway through the season. So the Spurs have completed 41 games. I'm going to go through different sections here. I'm going to start off with their record and standings and where they're at in the standings, then looking at their overall offense and defense, kind of where the numbers are at, where they're ranking right now compared to last season. And then finally looking at the math game and then how they've been doing by month. And it's been a bit of a concerning month here in January. So let's begin with the record and the standings. And I do want to note that I prepped this episode on Monday afternoon. So this information might have changed because there was a bunch of games on MLK Day for the NBA. So through 41 games, the Spurs are 19-22. So they are 3 games below 500 for the first time. Again, the worst they've ever been this season has been 2 games below 500. They did that twice, but now they fall into 3 games below 500 for the first time this season. They were currently 12th out west as of Monday. And again, that wasn't going to change. They were too far to catch the Suns, who were in 11th. They were 1.5 games behind the Suns, who were 21-21, 11th out west, and then 2 games behind the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are 22-21, 10th out west to be in the play-in picture. Per positive residual, the Spurs do have the 7th toughest schedule left in the league, but they also have some other teams that they're competing with for a playoff spot also have tough schedules out west, such as the Phoenix Suns have a tough schedule, the Sacramento Kings, the Memphis Grizzlies, and the Los Angeles Lakers. They all have tougher schedules than the Spurs, according to positive residual. So at least the Spurs aren't the only team with a tough schedule out west. There's a few other teams out there with them. According to Coach Johnson, one of his remarks that he made was he kind of just talked about how the Spurs are struggling right now. Obviously, they're having a rough stretch of basketball, and one thing he pointed out was that they have been playing better teams lately, and those good teams that they've played have exposed some things for them that they're going to have to work on. So again, that's something that Coach Johnson did mention. One thing that they are going through a rough stretch right now, where they are 1-6 in their last 7 games. But the more concerning part is that the Spurs, they've lost games obviously this year, but they've always been competitive and kind of fought back in games. And maybe they may not make the full comeback, but they're capable of getting it more competitive. What's more concerning is that in 3 of their last 5 games, they've completely gotten blown out. What I mean by that is that they have trailed by 25 or more points in 3 of their last 5 games. And overall for the season, they've only been down by 25 6 times. So again, that's concerning that out of those 6 times in the entire season, 3 of them have happened now in the last 5 games. So they're really just, when teams get control in these games, they're really just taking off away from the Spurs, and San Antonio is having a lot of difficulty right now. And so regarding Coach Johnson's comments about how the good teams are starting to expose some things for the Spurs on the other end, I do want to say that the Spurs are definitely struggling on offense right now. Like I mentioned, in the beginning of this episode, that teams are starting to go to strategy of backing off some of their non-shooters and using 2 bigs on Wemby. So like a team like Memphis either had Jaren Jackson Jr. guarding Wemby or Santi Aldama, and then they'd have a second big. They're kind of roaming the paint, being ready to provide some support. And then the Miami Heat did a similar game plan in the second half with Kelly Ware guarding Wemby, and then Jaren Jackson Jr. being that roam, that defender roaming the paint. And so I think that what Coach Johnson mentioned in some of his remarks were that when the Spurs struggle on offense, that leads to a lot of missed shots, some turnovers, and then that means that their transition defense is now getting tested. Where those teams, when the Spurs miss a shot, the teams are getting the rebound, they're pushing the pace, they're getting down court, and then the Spurs are having major communication issues. Is what both Coach Johnson and Stefan Castle have said, that they're just not communicating well in those transition opportunities, and so players are getting open looks under the rim, they're kicking out for wide open threes, and so I think that's a big part of why they've been struggling in these games lately, is that they're struggling offense is leading to issues on the defensive end. So they're going to have to really, they can't, it's hard to get, reliable shooters right now, especially, midway through the season. If the players just aren't, if they have like a bunch of players who just don't make accurate shots from 3, then teams are going to continue to leave those players open, which means that they really got to focus on that transition defense and just know that, a lot of times they're going to have to get back, find their man, whoever's out there, out on the other end in transition. But also more concerning too, is that as Coach Johnson mentioned, there are possessions too where the Spurs do get a layup make or made 3, but then the other team gets the ball and they just completely take off down court and get a layup inside or get an open 3, because the Spurs even are having difficulty in their transition defense getting back even on some of their makes. So again, it's really about the defense right now regarding their transition defense, but then also I think that the offense struggling does lead to that, and it's been interesting to see how some of the teams have adjusted to guarding Victor with putting 2 different bigs, one big in the paint and then having one big guarding Wemby out there, whether he's on the perimeter or inside. So again, that's just been. Now, update on their record and standings. So now let's go through the Spurs' offense and defense so far through 41 games this season. Kind of what I want to focus on here is look at what are their strengths on offense and defense through 41 games. What are their weaknesses? So when I say strengths, I'm talking about top 10 in these areas, weaknesses, bottom 10, and then just kind of like what's an overall grade or just like an assessment of who the Spurs are so far through midway through the season. So offensively, their strengths, they are top 10 in these different areas. Not a lot of areas here. Assist percentage, so they do a great job of getting an assist every time they move. They have to make a shot. They're usually passing it into a shot that's going to get made. 3-point attempts, they're still a very high volume shooting team from three. They're the sixth. They take the sixth most threes in a game, 43s per game this season. And then also dunk layup range makes. So making those baskets at the closest area to the rim, they are currently eighth there. So again, at least scoring near the rim has been a good positive for them in terms of that closest area to the rim. They are currently eighth there. However, there are some weaknesses, like I mentioned. They're bottom 10 in these three areas that aren't too concerning. So the three areas where they're bottom 10 are floater makes, floater accuracy, and mid-range accuracy. And those aren't efficient shots. You don't really, you don't want those too much part of your shot diet. So it's kind of okay that they're not a top 10 team there, or even a league average team. 3-point accuracy. This is a big one though. Like I mentioned earlier, how teams have figured out the Spurs. They know who's a reliable, dangerous, high volume outside shooter. And there's really three players on this roster. It's Julian Champagnie. And basically Devin Vassell. And obviously Harrison Barnes by accuracy is the most dangerous shooter on the team. He's the highest, accurate shooter from three, but he's not a high volume shooter. So Barnes doesn't take a lot of threes, whereas Champagnie will, and so will Vassell. Now Wemby's also a high volume shooter as well. Obviously we have to say that, but he's usually the guy who's getting the double teams, who has the ball in his hands. So he's having to find the players who are open. So again, since he has the ball in his hands most of the time, we're not going to consider Wemby part of that strategy where he's actually the guy drawing the double teams. So again, who does he have to kick out to? There's really just two players that the defense is, not going to back off of as much, and that's Champagnie and Vassell. So that means everyone else out on the floor, they're the defense is willing to gamble a little bit and have some of their players back off those players to focus on Victor. So obviously that's a huge issue for this team. And as far as is it a controllable problem right now? I don't think so. I think this is more an issue they're going to have to address in the offseason, where, a big chunk of the roster, if we look at their catch and shoot three percentage, or even some of their wide open three percentage, a big chunk of the roster, most of these players don't shoot efficiently. And so teams are going to be willing to gamble and shrink the inside of the floor while allowing some 3-point attempts. Same thing for their wide open 3-point accuracy. They are also bottom 10 here. They're currently 24th, shooting 37% on wide open threes. So again, that incentivizes the defense to take that gamble, to basically back off players and let them shoot wide open threes if they're going to miss for the majority of the team. So again, those are some of their issues on offense, and then some of their strengths on offense as well. So how would I, say an overall assessment grade for the Spurs so far through the 41 games? I would say they're slightly better than bottom 10 offensively. Again, not a great offense, not a top 10 offense, not even really a league average offense, kind of just barely better than being in the bottom 10. So obviously there's still some concerns there for them offensively, specifically the shooting from outside, which shrinks the inside of the floor for San Antonio. Regarding their defense, the Spurs have some areas of where they're top 10. So they're top 10 in opponent effective field goal percentage. So when you combine the two with the three, the Spurs are top 10 there. So they're doing a pretty good job there. Obviously, if you have Wemby, he's going to help you in that department. They're also doing a great job still through the season, midway through the season, of not putting their opponents on the free throw line. So they have the number one defense in opponent free throw attempt rate. They are first in blocks. Obviously, Wemby is collecting most of those. So you have Wemby on your team, you're going to be one of the best blocking teams in the NBA, and that's what they are. They're also top 10 in defensive rebounds per game, but I would say that one's a little bit questionable because they do struggle with allowing opponent second chance points and allowing opponent offensive rebound percentages I'm going to talk about here. So again, that one's a little bit more questionable as far as maybe they're just collecting more of the defensive rebounds is how we could say, just the volume of those rebounds, 34.4 per game. But I still think that's a huge issue for them because the other data is going to say that as we talk about in a little bit. They're also top 10, actually number one. I give again, we give Victor credit here. So that they are the best team in defending the restricted area, that dunk layup range, where teams are only making 62% of their shots there at that closest point to the rim, and obviously that's a huge factor for having Victor on your team. So obviously he's having a huge impact there in terms of the teams converting those attempts there at the rim. 62% of them are only going in, which is number one for the Spurs amongst all NBA teams. Their weaknesses, though, where they're bottom 10, they are. So one thing that where they're bottom 10, I'm gonna tie these three areas together because it's part philosophy, but then also just part of the players that are out on the floor. So they're bottom 10 in opponent turnover percentage, meaning that they don't make the opponents turn the ball over a lot. They're bottom 10 in steals, and then that means that if they're not getting turnovers from the opponent, that means that it's harder for them to get out on the break and get points off turnovers. And so they are also bottom 10 in points off turnovers. Now, I do want to say that part of this is part philosophy, meaning that the Spurs are usually especially when Coach Pop's there, they're usually a defense who do not like to gamble a lot, out on the defensive possessions. You basically stay with your man. You don't let your man get by you. You don't want to be gambling and putting your help defense in situations or players having to rotate and cover for you just because you're trying to gamble for steals or deflections. So that's partly that's their team philosophy. They're not a high gambling team in terms of trying to get steals or force deflections. Although it is more incentivized now because they have a great rim protector there, and Wemby can cover a lot of mistakes. But right now, I think their priority is just trying to stay in front of the player who has the ball in front of them, not really going for those steals or for those deflections. But also, I would also say that they just have a lot of players on the roster that just aren't known for lockdown perimeter defense. Aside from like maybe Jeremy Sohan, Julian Champagnie, Stephon Castle. That's basically like three players who are known for being really solid, good lockdown defenders. So that's also part of it, is that you can't have all those players out on the floor at the same time, because a lot of them have difficulties on offense, specifically like Castle or Sohan. You can't have them both in the same lineup. It makes it tough on your offense, but then you need their perimeter defense. And then same thing for Champagnie. If he's not getting minutes, it's going to be Vassell. Vassell's a great shooter. Can do a lot more, with the ball in his hands driving in, but also, not at the level of defense that Julian Champagnie brings to your team. So again, it's also part of the roster of how the roster's put together, as far as some of those numbers as well, in terms of creating steals or getting deflections. Opponent of offensive rebound percentage, they are also bottom 10 here. And also, what else? Opponent second chance points, as I mentioned, they are also bottom 10 there. And they're also bottom 10 in opponent dunk layup range makes. So again, I talked about how good the Spurs are in contesting those areas, those attempts, but teams are still scoring a lot there near the rim on them. And part of that is that when Victor sits, their defense really struggles. They haven't really found an answer for a backup big. Sometimes it's Charles Bassey, sometimes it's Zach Collins. They just really haven't found that answer. And that's also a question of, as I'm going to get to a little bit later, do you semi want to address that with like a big who can help you on the board? So there's someone like maybe Jonas Valanciunas, but then, Valanciunas isn't going to help you with that rim protection of deterring teams from attacking the Spurs inside. So again, that's like where, even a trade might not be out there. You just got to, you got to really look at the roster and going into the offseason for this question. And so, yeah, I think that's a lot of the areas. Opponent points of the paint, like I mentioned, is pretty high. And then opponent mid-range accuracy is also pretty high, but that's okay. You kind of want to if you have to give up one shot, you'd rather give up mid-rangers over anything. So again, maybe when Sohan comes back, he can help a little bit there in terms of teams making shots in that dunk layup range. But overall, it is still going to be a question for the roster construction going forward about, what do you do as a Spurs in those moments when Wemby has to sit, basically, because that's where their big issues are. So if I had to say, an overall assessment grade for them right now through their defense through 41 games midway through the season, I'd say that they're slightly worse than league average. So again, not bottom 10 like last year, but at least, right within league average, kind of just a little bit off league average. And when Wemby's on the floor, they are elite defensively. Here are some of the numbers according to Cleaning the Glass. When Wemby's on the floor, opponents are scoring 11.3 points per 100, less points per 100 when he's out there on the floor. That's the 98th percentile according to Cleaning the Glass elite defense. So again, when Victor's on the floor, they're a great defense. But it's the issue, like I mentioned, is what do you do when he has to go to the bench? I mean, he has to rest at some point, and just being in his second year in his career, the Spurs aren't playing him like 40 minutes a night. He's only averaging 33 minutes per game. That means that there's a 15-minute time span every game where he's not on the floor, and that's where the Spurs are really struggling. You can just see it by the eye test. Teams get more motivated, and they start driving inside against the Spurs' backline defenders and whoever else is out there. And so, and the numbers also show it that when Bassey is the 5 or Collins is the 5, the defense really takes a huge hit. And so again, that's kind of one of the questions of, I don't know if there's a perfect trade out there in terms of the candidates that are out there that can address this issue of both the boards plus the rim protection, or maybe you just look at the draft, you look at maybe another trade later in the offseason for a player who does a little bit more of that is the question. So that's their a quick overall assessment of their defense so far through the midway point of the season. Now let's look at the math game through the 41 game mark of the season. So in terms of overall, the Spurs are getting outscored in total points by they're a minus 58, so they're getting outscored by 58 points total and through all their 41 games. Their big issue still is the 2-point range, where they're getting outscored by 186 points. They still have a pretty big lead in terms of free throw scoring, so they're outscoring their opponents by 119 made free throws. But opponents have really closed the gap in that 3-point shooting. So initially, the Spurs had a pretty good lead in terms of their opponents on made threes. But now they're just a +9 in terms of made threes. So basically, they've only made 3 more threes than their opponent in the overall data. Here is what we see here. So basically, if the trend keeps going how it is, teams are going to the opponent's going to start winning the 3-point line now as well. They're about to take that, whether that's Thursday against the Pacers or maybe Saturday. Basically, if the Spurs get the opponents start making more threes like they've been doing against the Spurs are going to lose that range, and so basically San Antonio is only going to be winning the free throw line this season. So again, that's just kind of a quick look at their math game in terms of where they're at right now. All right, and then the last part of this assessment of just looking at the Spurs to the midway point is that they are having a rough January right now. So if I look, I basically put all the data together for each month of the season in terms of their offense and defensive rating and their net rating. And so October, November, when you combine those 2 months, they were just a minus 0.1 points per 100. Basically like league average. So again, that showed kind of in their record where they were almost like a 500 team. They were 20th on offense, which kind of matches what they are overall. But their defense was really good. This is the best defense they were playing this season, which was in October, November. They were almost a top 10 defense. They were 11th during that time frame. Then in December, they were pretty similar. Overall they finished the month minus 0.3 points per 100, which was 16th. So good league average, kind of right there around 500. Their offense kind of stayed in the same place, was scoring 112.3 points per 100, ranked 17th. Their defense started to slip a little bit though, and here's where they fall to like around mid to about league average. Their defense it slips to about 112.5 points per 100, but again, not too concerning, staying around that 500 level of a team. Then in January, now luckily the month's not over yet. There's still about 4 or 5 games left this month, but in January it has been rough here. So offensively, they're having their worst month scoring the ball. They're only scoring 110.7 points per 100, which is 24th. And then defensively, they're having also their worst month defensively, scoring 119 points per 100, which is 27th. So overall, in the month of January, they are a minus 8.3 points per 100, which is 27th. And again, part of this too is that they've been getting blown out lately, and so that's obviously going to lead to really bad looking numbers for you if you're getting blown out. And that's something that they hadn't been doing a lot in the first 2 months or first 3 months, was getting blown out. They were always competitive in games even if they lost them. And so again, that's just kind of a look at their picture of January, and let's see kind of how they close out this month, if they can kind of make it whether winning games or at least losing more competitive games rather than just getting blown out like they had been doing here in these last few games. All right, the next question I want to address is this is more so an open-ended question, so I'm not going to talk about any specific players here, but just more so like, how do you, if you're the Spurs, how do you approach the trade deadline? So again, like I mentioned at the start of this episode, the trade deadline is about 2.5 weeks away now, so it's coming pretty quickly. And what do you do if you're the Spurs? You could go the route of do you go after like a role player who's going to add maybe something to your team that you need right now, but also maybe be on a contract for a few more seasons? So a player here, as I've written about, is someone like Cameron Johnson. There's a pretty high price tag to getting Cameron Johnson. According to the latest reporting, the Nets do want 2 first-round picks. So do you want to do that? Give away 2 first-round picks just to get a player who's going to help you, yes, with the outside shooting, is also on a good contract for 2 more seasons. But again, he's for this season specifically, he may not take you get you into the playing range. Specifically, they're falling a little bit more. So he's gonna help you on the margins basically. Then to help with not the rim protection, but with the rebounding issue there on the glass for the opponents, do you maybe go after a player like Jonas Valanciunas, a big who's available from the Washington Wizards, again on a pretty good contract. The Wizards probably want like 2 or 3 second-round picks for him, but if you have to include the contract of Zach Collins, now you're looking at having to give probably away a first-round pick to get Valanciunas. And again, with Valanciunas, he's going to barely help you on the margins in one specific area, but he's not really going to he's not going to help as much in the rim protection area. He's going to help with the rebounding issue for you. And, there's no guarantee that adding Valanciunas or Cam Johnson, immediately puts you back into that playing range. They're going to help you, but they're not, gonna make you right away a top 8 or top 6 playoff team out west. Then there's of course the star player route, and the issue with this route is that there's not really a lot of star players available. Obviously, De'Aaron Fox has been the player linked to the Spurs about a month ago, but things have started to get better in Sacramento. They've kind of they got here on they've been playing better basketball. They're back in the playoff picture out west. They've started to turn things around, and like I had mentioned before, the Fox move wouldn't probably happen until probably the summer, in the event that one, he doesn't make All NBA, and then two, he actually says he wants out of Sacramento. So the Kings finished this season off playing pretty well, and they're a competitive playoff team in the Western Conference, then maybe things get maybe Fox eventually signs an extension with the Kings in the summer. So again, I don't think that the Fox deal is going to be on the table from now within these next 2.5 weeks. I think that the Kings right now, it looks like they're going to end up probably keeping him on the team. So again, aside from I don't think if you're the Spurs, you want to add Jimmy Butler or Brandon Ingram. So again, there's not really like a star player out there that they can add this season. So again, I'm really interested to see how they approach this deadline, because again, I don't know if they just want to finish out the season, let this group kind of play it out. Maybe they don't get into play-in, maybe they do, or try be more aggressive and trying to get them at least to the play-in by maybe swinging a trade for like a player like Cam Johnson or maybe a Jonas Valanciunas to try to help them fight a little bit more, or just kind of just let the season play out and they end up wherever they do in the draft lottery. And so regarding this question, what I did was I wanted to look at the Spurs' schedule from now until the lottery. And so they do have from now until the trade deadline, which is February 6th. So they're going to have 7 games before this time period. So here are their games, and they have some really tough teams here. They're going to play the Pacers twice in France, which is more so like a home crowd for the Spurs, because they're in Wemby's home country. They're going to play the Clippers in San Antonio, who the Spurs did beat pretty well last time they faced the Clippers in San Antonio. But that was also, Kawhi Leonard started to slowly come back. The Clippers were also missing a few players in that game, and also they were on the second out of back-to-back. So maybe if it's I haven't looked at, I didn't look at whether or not somebody's on the second out of back-to-back, but that's something to consider. The Milwaukee Bucks, they're going to play in San Antonio, which obviously the Bucks, in that game in Milwaukee, they really took control and beat the Spurs. They're playing the Heat in San Antonio. The Spurs obviously show that they have some difficulty against Miami. They're going to play the Memphis Grizzlies in Memphis, and obviously they're 0-2 already against the Grizzlies in San Antonio. And then they're going to play the Hawks in Atlanta on the road. And obviously we saw that it took overtime for the Spurs to beat the Hawks, and that was in their own building. And now they're going to be in Atlanta's building for this next game. So let's just say in these 7 games, the Spurs go 2-5. Basically on paper, maybe if I had to do Vegas's, projections, I would say they'd probably go 2-5. So let's say they go 2-5. That would put them at 21-27 going into the trade deadline. They'd be 6 games under 500. Let's say that they play better than that. They go 3-4 in these next 7 games. Then they're 22-26 going into the trade deadline. Again, 4 games under 500. Let's say they do really well and they ended up having a winning record during this time frame of 7 games. Let's say they go 4-3. They're still going to be 2 games below 500 at this point, going 4-3 against these 7 teams. They would be 23-25. So again, that's why I get to this question of how are they approaching the trade deadline, because to out west right now, the Wolves are currently 1 game above 500, and that's just to keep you 10th in out west. So again, right now it's showing that even being 500 isn't good enough out west, because the Phoenix Suns are currently 500 and they're not even in the play-in picture. So again, I think that's what I'm really interested to see is how are the Spurs approaching this deadline, and let's just say they end up in these next 7 games, they go 2-5 or 3-4. So they're about 4 or 6 games below 500. And basically it definitely looks like, they're out of the play-in picture because there's only 34 games left this season. And so, I also wonder too, how do they go forward with some of the veteran players, somebody like Chris Paul, who's going to be an unrestricted free agent next season, someone like Trey Jones. I know they have Harrison Barnes under contract for 2 more years. So again, that's when those questions start to open up as well, is if they're pretty far out of the play-in picture by that point, within 2.5 weeks, do they start looking at, pivoting of just letting the young players finish out the season, or maybe looking to move some of the vets or not? So again, those are just some questions to ponder as these next 7 games approach, because I think these are going to be some critical 7 games for the Spurs, because it's going to show kind of their path of what they're going to do, or how far are they going to be from the play-in picture, or they're going to be completely out of it. And now it's just kind of finishing out the season, but knowing that you're going to probably just end up getting a lottery pick within like that 7 through like 14, the 13 or 14 range kind of question.